This is an unabridged fan read by Christian Karlström of A Good War by Robert Brooks. Part 2. The March to Silithus. A noise outside Saurfang's room woke him with a jolt. He smelled blood. He smelled an enemy. The Alliance has come for me. In one motion, he snatched a dagger, leaning against his bedding, and swiped at knee level. Anyone standing near his bed would have been crippled. The blade touched nothing but air. He was alone in his quarters. A face appeared outside, leaning around the frame of the door. "Good morning, High Overlord," his visitor said, dryly adding, "and a good form on that strike."
"You stink like a human,"
Saurfang set his dagger down.
"That is a dangerous thing."
Nathanos Blightcaller offered a faint smirk and remained out in the hallway. "We need to talk." Saurfang donned a loose pair of breeches and joined him. It was just before dawn, and the sky had already lightened. He would have needed to wake up soon, anyway.
"What happened?"
he asked. Nathanos scratched his shin. It was an awkward motion, as though he still wasn't used to the shape of his face. Saurfang had never asked how the Forsaken Ranger had received a new body. He wasn't sure he wanted to know. He wouldn't get an honest answer anyway. "We spotted the 5 Alliance spies during the night." Saurfang grunted. These days, that wasn't unusual.
"And?"
"2 of them were trying to climb the tower here, to your quarters." That was unusual. Though likely all they wanted was a look at any letters Saurfang had in his room.
"If they had orders to collect my head, they would have sent more. Did they make it up here?"
Nathanos shook his head. "I took care of the matter."
"Is that so?"
Saurfang noticed for the first time a couple of spots of liquid on the Forsaken's blue coat, not yet fully dry. He snatched the dagger from Nathanos' belt sheath. Nathanos narrowed his eyes but didn't object. The Forsaken Ranger had cleaned the blade before sheathing it, but not perfectly. Saurfang bared his teeth. "That's why I smelled blood."
"Did you kill both of them?"
Nathanos took the dagger back. His red eyes looked elsewhere. "One, a human. He didn't have much to say to me," which meant he had tortured the spy before killing him. "The other was Calderai, I think. They're skilled at night. He got away."
"Good,"
Saurfang said sharply.
"We need the Alliance to believe they're in control. The war chief told you not to hunt their spies. Obey her."
"They will not find his body," Nathanos said.
"They don't need to."
Spies disappeared only for 2 reasons. They joined the other side, or they were killed. And no human would join the Horde. No living human, he corrected himself.
"You get close to one again and you let him go. Understand? Pretend they outran you."
"Yes, my lord." Nathanos inclined his head calmly. "Your talks with the war chief, are they going well?" Saurfang lowered his voice.
"What has he told you?"
Nathanos didn't answer, which was answer enough. She told him nothing. Saurfang leaned in close, growling.
"You know better than to ask about these matters in the open."
Nathanos did not flinch. "No one is listening. If I'm standing next to you or guarding the room you're in, the Alliance will not hear your words. Assume they will hear everything else." That was not arrogance. Nathanos had a knack for going where he was not wanted and rooting out others who tried to do the same. He was also the war chief's closest advisor. If he truly knew nothing, that was a good sign. It meant Sylvanas had been sincere. She was leaving this in Saurfang's hands. So Saurfang decided to make use of him.
"Silithus,"
he said. That earned a sideways look. "What about Silithus?"
"Silithus,"
Saurfang repeated.
"Remember that word, but never say it out loud."
Nathanos shifted slightly, turning his whole body toward the orc. "The land around the sword is secure, is it not? Has something happened?"
"No. You made sure that Silithus and all of its deposits of azurite are firmly in the Horde's hands,
Saurfang said lightly.
I would like to keep it that way. I will send several hundred soldiers south in a few days. They will secure the route and fortify our defenses at the sword.
Nathanos was clearly suspicious of every word, but he played along. Secure the route. For who? How many more are we sending?
How many more do you think would be appropriate?
None, the Forsaken said immediately. The Horde shouldn't waste its armies on a desert the Alliance has no intention of invading. It would split our strength while the enemy lurks in our city. Saurfang offered a small shrug.
Perhaps the war chief agrees with you. Perhaps I will march the soldiers down there regardless in a month.
The orc watched Nathanos carefully. The undead man blinked once, twice, and finally, he nodded. Perhaps I will not be very happy about that, but the interest of serving the Horde, perhaps I will keep that to myself. Except on certain occasions. Perhaps I let my frustration show once too often, where there are enemies to see it. He understands.
But most importantly,
Saurfang said,
the Alliance will wonder why we're marching now. What provoked me to this action? The entire Horde will wonder the same thing. Questions and rumors will flow. The Alliance will do everything they can to find out the truth.
Nathanos' eyes narrowed. If there were an answer to that question, if the Horde had discovered some compelling reason to march down there, he would already know of it. And when they cannot find an answer, even with their army of spies, they will become uneasy.
I cannot predict what they will do,
Saurfang said.
But they will do something. Perhaps that will create an opportunity.
Not much of a plan, Nathanos remarked, but the corners of his lips twitched. Yet the strategy is entertaining. I prefer it that way. With that, he turned and left, disappearing into the tower stairwell. Now there were 3 in Orgrimmar who understood the deception Saurfang would try to create. That circle would widen slightly over the next few weeks, but not by much. It couldn't. To conquer Darnassus, Saurfang would need to mobilize the Horde for war. Thousands of troops would make ready for a long march, gather endless amounts of supplies and prepare themselves for battle in countless ways. He could not hide that from the Alliance. He half expected Stormwind to have better accounting of the Horde's soldiers and supplies than he did. He even expected them to follow the Horde on each step of their journey, taking every opportunity to sabotage cart axles, destroy weapons, and do other such nonsense. So how, then, could the attack come as a surprise? By making the Alliance intelligence tell the wrong story, Sylvanas had said. She was right. If this campaign was going to succeed, the Alliance spies needed to become the Horde's greatest assets. They needed to tell Stormwind that the Horde was aiming far to the south, not the west, and that they were preparing for a war years down the road, not weeks. It was time to get to work. Nargol, the quartermaster, stared at his sheet of parchment with a look of growing horror. Where did this list come from? High Overlord Saurfang, said the troll courier. The orc scratched his shin. He wants more than I have. I'll have to shift our food shipments around, and we'll have to pay a lot of merchants for their carts for transportation. The blacksmiths will have to work night and day. Even then, it will take me 2 months to gather all of this. And that will take a miracle. You'll be having 1 month, the troll said. What? Nargol looked at the parchment again. These were enough supplies to feed half of the Horde army for a year. What is Saurfang planning? The troll just shrugged. It was a miracle the explosion had not killed anyone. The forge had started sparking, whistling, and leaking molten metal, giving everyone enough time to run before it shattered violently, filling the burning anvil with blazing hot shrapnel. The master smith, Sorrow Steelfury, had come out unscathed but shatty. "One of my apprentices must have left some felt slate cooking too long. You know how that demon steel gets." The noise had startled half the city and badly damaged the interior of the building. Speculation immediately turned to the idea that the forged had been the victim of Alliance sabotage. "That is nonsense," Steelfury told anyone who would listen. "Just one of my fool apprentices. Mistakes happen." Even High Overlord Sourfang had come down to expect the damage.
"Orgrimmar honors every smith and forge,"
he announced.
"So I will make sure everything is repaired, just like new, in less than a week."
Sourfang had even promised in writing, "Every scrap of azurite that was lost in the explosion will be replaced soon." Steelfury was confused. He would accept every ounce of azurite he could get, but there had been none in the forge that day. He was certain of it. Sourfang must have been misinformed. Then again, he thought, if I'm seen as the only smith in Orgrimmar who knows how to craft with azurite, that can only be good for my reputation. He kept the leather inside a leather hide pack hidden behind a panel underneath his favorite forge. A few days later, he noticed a scratch mark on the panel, as though someone has forced it open to look inside. But that didn't seem likely. Nothing was stolen. Everything, including the letter, was right where Steelfury remembered placing it. Well, maybe the letter was in the wrong pocket, but... Sylvanas Windrunner took a deep breath and then hissed out in frustration. "If we have no other options, I will handle them myself." Sourfang said nothing for a while. It was a bad idea, but at the moment, it was the best one they had. Sourfang and Sylvanas had discussed strategy and tactics for days, and it had become clear that there were two huge, inescapable points of failure in their plan: Malfurion Stormrage and Tyrande Whisperwind. The leaders of the Night Elves were powerful, dangerous, and perhaps even unbeatable on the field of battle. No matter how surprised the Calorai would be by this attack, those two would be a horror for the Horde once the fighting began. They had lived for so long and survived so much that Sourfang had to consider the possibility that they could hold off the Horde long enough for the Alliance to send help. Ashenvale was their land, after all. They would rally nature itself to their cause. Sylvanas could match one of them. Perhaps. But even she knew that taking them on by herself was not an ideal tactic. This information would not be useful towards solving the dilemma. What false information could you hand a flock of Alliance spies that could make Darnassus conclude that both of its leaders needed to stay out of the war once it began?
"We wait for an opportunity,"
Sourfang muttered.
"and if they give us one, we take it."
Sylvanas agreed. They continued to meet every day. That would be noticed, so there needed to be an explanation. Sourfang tried to construct it carefully. He never spoke out against the war chief, and he openly professed his loyalty to her, as an honorable orc should. But he also made sure he left every meeting with her looking visibly shaken and humiliated. It paid off. Sylvanas showed him a scroll from a spy in Stormwind. "The Alliance suspects you and I spend our days at each other's throats," she said. With a hint of irony, she added, "And they believe you are pushing hard for open military action, despite my concerns." Nathanos must have outdone himself with his feigned compliments. Spies looked for hidden information and trusted almost nothing they heard. You did not fool them by telling them a lie straight out. You fooled them by burying a lie so deep that it took great effort and personal risk to uncover it. It was only natural to believe that the secrets your enemy desperately tried to hide were the truth. That bias could color every report the spies sent back to their masters. And it would be easy to believe that Sourfang chafed under the command of Sylvanas Windrunner, because in certain ways, he did. It would be easy to believe that the old orc was eager to spill some blood in battle, while the Banshee Queen wanted to find advantages by working in the shadows, because that was how both had traditionally waged war in the past. They were nothing alike. They came from different peoples, they saw the world in different ways. There would be no surprise that they were spending their days in conflict. Perhaps the Alliance would even believe Saurfang wanted to go to Silithus, just to get away from her. And if the Alliance believed that, what would they make of the other information they received?
Anyone who kills an Alliance spy will receive 1,000 gold coins,
Saurfang bellowed. A shocked murmur rippled through the ranks of Orgrimmar guards standing before him. This reward was significantly more than any offered thus far.
This is our city, but if the Alliance insists on staying here, we will prove ourselves generous hosts.
Saurfang said that with a sneer. He swept his arm behind him, gesturing to Gromma's hold. A dozen clean spikes hung from the tower's overhang some 50 feet off the ground.
This is where we will mount their heads. What better view of Orgrimmar could they have but this?
The guards murmured in excitement. Saurfang could see that many of them were already thinking of ways to spend the 1,000 gold. Too bad. He would be surprised if even one of those spikes were used. And the Alliance would likely notice something else. Hadn't the war chief offered 500 gold for the capture of spies only a few days earlier? Saurfang was doubling the offer but demanding that the spies be killed, not captured. He wanted tensions to ramp up. He was subtly defying his war chief to make it happen. Signs of a rift between a leader and her commander were the best news an espionage agent could report. Sylvanas had been pleased. "You learn in the ways of deception well, High Overlord," she said. "But what's the next step? The one that lets the world know the rift between you and me is widening."
Do you have something in mind?
Saurfang asked. "You and Nathanos need to come to blow. In public." Saurfang was delighted.
We should warn him. If he believes we're truly fighting, he might force me to kill him.
Nathanos raised his chin. "How hard am I allowed to strike you, High Overlord?" "Guards! Guards! Help!" Morka yelled. "I caught one," she thought with delirious joy. "I caught a spy." Morka had spotted a slight shimmer to a nearby shadow. She had thrown her shield and scored a lucky hit, dazing the rogue. Now the rogue was wriggling in her grip, snarling and bucking harder than such a small creature should ever have the right to. A black cloak was wrapped around his head, and his dagger just lay out of reach. By the spirit, he's slippery. Morka used her body weight to pin the gnome to the ground, ignoring the gouges that its fingernails tore into her arm. A clatter of footsteps meant backup would arrive any second. Her hands struggled to pull one of her small axes from her belt. She hoped to have his head off before anyone else could claim her prize. "I'll make this quick," she sneered into his ear. "There's a pike waiting." A blade laid against her throat. "Let him go. Slowly," a voice said. Of course there was more than one. She caught the scent of a human. His blade pressed into her neck hard enough to draw blood. One twitch and her veins would be opened to the air. Death would claim her shortly. "Do it now," the voice insisted. She bared her teeth, but she had been caught. She let the gnome go. He sprinted into the shadows without a look back. The human voice continued. "Now, step back with me and—" She grabbed the wrist and pulled. The knife fell to the ground, but her attacker threw powder before her eyes with his other hand. It ignited, the flash blinded and deafened her. She rolled on the ground, holding her ears, unable to hear herself scream. When new hands grabbed her around the shoulders a few moments later, she fought mightily until she realized they belonged to an orc and a tauren. Allies, friends. They lifted her upright and waited for her disorientation to clear. A red haze swam before Morka's eyes. Shame, rage, and humiliation whirred in her soul. "They got away," she growled. The others charged off to search for the spies. But she sat it out, furious with herself, shaking off the lingering dizziness while letting another guard bandage the scratched wounds on her arm and neck. The human's blade still lay on the ground, so she picked it up and inspected it. Strange. This was Ogrimar's steel. Why would a human have this? The next hour passed in a blur. Morka stayed put, studying the knife until an officer found her. High Overlord Sourfang would like to speak with you, Nathanos Blackcollar said. She didn't know him personally, but she knew his reputation, and his voice sounded familiar. He seemed to be limping today. This day could still get much worse. Rumor had it that Nathanos and Sourfang had fought each other outside Gromash Hold yesterday. Being in the same place with both might be unpleasant. Morka stilled her unease. Of course, lead the way. She followed him to the Valley of Spirits. He opened a tent flap and gestured for her to enter. Morka stepped inside with trepidation. There was a wounded orc, bandaged and sleeping comfortably. High Overlord Sourfang sat cross-legged with his back to the tent flap. One of his eyes was swollen shut.
You are the one who caught the spy?
He asked. Almost, my lord, Morka said. Would Sourfang remember her? He showed no sign of recognition, which was a relief. He had a friend. I let them away.
You aren't the first.
Sit. He waited for her to find a comfortable position. Indicating the wounded orc, he said,
The spy you encountered attacked this orc earlier. He's a courier, carrying important messages for me.
She grimaced. Will he live?
Yes. But I'm afraid the spy got away with everything he had.
Sourfang leaned forward.
Did you see the second spy? The one who attacked you?
Morka shook her head. I smell human. He was carrying this. She showed him the knife. It has Ogrimmar Smith markings. My mate might have made this dagger. Why would a human have it? An odd smile flashed across Sourfang's face.
An interesting question. Blightcaller?
The Forsaken poked his head into the tent. Yes?
This guard has your dagger, Sourfang said.
Morka's mouth moved, but no sound emerged. What did he just say? Nathanos scowled and held out his hand. Morka gave the blade to him without a word, and Nathanos left the tent again. Sourfang watched her expression closely. Morka didn't know what to say, or rather, everything she wanted to say would get her executed for insubordination. My lord, He held up a hand.
We needed that spy to get away. The Alliance must see what he stole,
he said quietly.
It was important. I'm sorry. But understand this. You have done very, very well.
Thank you, she said in a voice that was calmer than she felt.
You are being trusted with a great secret,
Sourfang continued.
You have proved yourself capable. That deserves consideration. I'm going to need personal guards for a new military matter. Would you like to be one of them?
Instead of staying on the battlements for another year? Absolutely. Her confusion and anger settled slightly, but she didn't know how to respond. Sourfang changed the subject.
You have a mate. Is he a blacksmith?
Yes, High Overlord.
Do you have any children?
8, Morka said. Sourfang's eyes went wide.
8? By the spirits. I never had the courage to even try for that. Let me say this. You fought with me before at the crossroads, and I hope you will fight with me again, soon, just as then. You will witness a victory that will make your children proud.
Morka spoke without thinking. Will I get to kill some Alliance?
Yes, you will.
Then I accept, High Overlord, she said.
Be ready. We're supposed to march in a few weeks. It may happen much sooner than that.
It wasn't until the next day that she realized he had remembered, without asking, that they had fought together at the crossroads. He does remember me from the battlements. She felt very, very lucky he had given her a second chance. The war chief was in deep thought. The Alliance has taken the bait, Silana said. But perhaps we're moving too quickly. Sourfang nearly laughed. She is concerned we're moving too quickly.
This is more than we could ever have dreamed. The Alliance did not just take the bait, they left the door open. They do not even imagine what we're planning.
The war chief had just received a shocking piece of news from her spies. Stormwind had grown so concerned about the Horde's apparent fixation on Silithus that they had asked the Night Elves to send their fleet to keep an eye on the Horde's movement. Even now, most of the Kaldorei ships were on their way to Ferrolas, planning to create a staging ground high in the hills around the Sword of Sargeras. Saurfang had not guessed they would do that, but he was genuinely impressed. It was a brilliant strategic move, if the Horde had been truly sending their armies there. Take defensible high ground, keep an eye on your enemy, and have a position prepared to move on the region in force. It was shrewd and far more decisive than he would have believed of Anduin Wrynn. And, unfortunately for the Alliance, it had not stopped there. Tyrande Whisperwind was planning to remain in Stormwind for weeks to construct a long-term strategy for dealing with the Horde's strange movements. She had already left Darnassus. It was the perfect time to strike. But for some reason, the war chief was hesitating.
You wanted to launch the attack in 3 weeks, High Overlord, she said.
That was when I believed we needed to handle Tyrande and Malfurion. Now we only need to contain one of them, he replied. We'll have a few less soldiers ready for the fight, but we'll still outnumber the Night Elves 8-1 instead of 12-1.
Sylvanas considered that.
What stops Tyrande from rushing back to the battle? Moving an army from Stormwind in a blink is not possible. Moving a single creature is much easier, she said darkly.
It was possible, Saurfang knew, but not likely.
How many innocent lives will Tyrande sacrifice to kill a few of our soldiers? He asked. That is the question she will face. She will not know of the attack until it has begun. By the time Stormwind makes sense of it, it will be clear that we will overrun Darnassus. Tyrande can slow us down by joining the battle after we made major strides in their territory. Or she can use her power to speed up the evacuation and heal the wounded. If she does not believe she can stop us, there's no choice to make. She would save her people.
Nathanos finally spoke up.
And it will give you a chance to hunt Malfurion alone, War Chief.
The look in Sylvanas' eyes gave Saurfang pause. She was more annoyed than he would have expected. If the Horde managed to kill both Tyrande and Malfurion, yes, it would be a great victory that would weaken the Alliance. But the objective was supposed to be conquering the World Tree. That wedge would split the Alliance no matter who ruled the Night Elves. Saurfang considered, not for the first time, that Sylvanas wasn't telling him everything. Does that matter? Saurfang asked himself. No, he decided. She wasn't lying about the importance of this objective. And if she had plans beyond the coming battle, well, she was the war chief, was she not? Sylvanas tapped her fingers on the table, thinking.
Let us make sure the Tyrande does not return. The Kaldorei evacuation. It helps us if they use every resource to get their people off the World Tree before we arrive. Correct?
I believe so, War Chief,
Saurfang said. It would reduce the number of prisoners the Horde would need to care for. It would take the fighters off the line to guard the evacuation, and it would mean that most of the Alliance magic wielders would need to remain on Teldrassil to assist instead of joining the battle in Ashenvale. She pointed to the map. Darkshore.
We need to frighten them before we arrive there. If they decide to fight instead of run, the final step of this battle will be messier than all the rest, she said. What can we do to make the civilians of Teldrassil so afraid they can think of nothing but running?
Nathanos grunted. The threat of immediate death worked wonders. Can we bring your new plague with us, War Chief?
No, Saurfang exploded. Absolutely not, you blasted idiot! If we murder every person on the World Tree, we will unite the Alliance against us!
I was suggesting that we bring it as a threat. Not a promise, Nathanos said.
It would not work,
Sylvana said. She seemed to consider something, but then shook her head.
Saurfang is right. The Alliance would never believe we would use it.
It is unthinkable. Wiping out an entire city like that. A bluff with no teeth.
Siege weapons,
Saurfang said suddenly.
We doubled the number of siege engines.
He walked to the map and began placing stone figures on Darkshore.
If we bring enough siege weapons to Darkshore and aim them toward Darnassus, we have won. We can rain down death with impunity if they resist. They will make their stand before Darkshore, not after. They will evacuate rather than see a final battle destroy their home. When we arrive, the tree will be undefended.
Nathanos studied the map and nodded. He is right, Warchief. Sylvanas considered it.
It will slow us down. You will need to task guards to keep the siege crews safe, for they will be the prime targets for the Kaldari.
Finally, she nodded too.
But it will work. Your plans in motion, High Overlord. Begin in 1 week.
Saurfang rattled his axe against his armor.
For the Horde,
he said. She smiled at that.
For the Horde.
Within a day, Saurfang began to reveal the true plan, but only to those who would execute the first strike. It took a long time to brief large numbers of rogues in any plan. These were not individuals who liked crowds or lectures, so he had to do it 2 at a time. Nathanos was elsewhere, briefing 2 more. Between them, they could get a few hundred in place before the week's end. It took 3 minutes to lay out the basics, and simultaneous strikes across Ashenvale, Horde infiltrators would attack every Night Elf patrol and outpost. At least, that was the goal. The accelerated plan meant little time for scouting and preparation. Saurfang would be happy if half the strikes were successful, but he wouldn't admit that to his soldiers.
Any questions?
Saurfang asked the 2 rogues in front of him. Of course there were questions. The first rogue, a Cinderai named Lorash Sunbeam, pointed at the map on the table, marked with the Night Elf outposts and patrol routes in Ashenvale. The known ones, anyway.
You're asking us to start a war with the Alliance, he said.
Does that trouble you?
Lorash's eyebrows twitched.
Not in the slightest, but you're not offering us enough of a reward. If you expect us to launch our attack at the exact same time on the exact same day, he sighed, some of us will have to strike at inopportune moments. That is a large risk.
Saurfang considered that.
I have trusted you with this much information. I can spare little more. Here is our final objective.
He tapped on the map. Darnassus. And then he waited. The rogues were not the easiest creatures to shock. Saurfang enjoyed watching their eyes widen, their mouths drop open, and their straddled glances between each other. Lorash even laughed out loud, wearing a vicious smile. Saurfang waited until they had properly digested that news.
The World Tree has strategic value, and so the Horde will keep it. The city of Darnassus is filled with tremendous amount of priceless treasure. Most of it does not have strategic value, and so the Horde will not need to keep it. Those who take risks in the Horde's name will be rewarded. I can assure you.
The other rogue, a Forsaken named Ryfun, looked happy. Lorash had one more question.
If we're targeting the Night Elves, I presume Malfurion Stormrage will be involved.
You will not be asked to face him,
Saurfang said.
And what if I would like to?
Lorash asked. Ryfun snorted and shook his head, but said nothing. Saurfang spread his hands, a gesture of permissiveness.
If you bring down Malfurion Stormrage in the battle, you will be rewarded,
he said.
I might advise you to avoid that fight, however.
There were no more doubts among this duo. 2 down, many more to go. The day had come. Thousands upon thousands of Horde soldiers woke at dawn, assembled outside Ogremore, and began to secure their supplies for the long and uneventful march to Silithus. None of them spoke openly of any misgivings, but Saurfang caught snatches of quiet grumbling about the assignment. He couldn't blame them. They believed Saurfang was moving a large portion of the Horde's ground troops to Silithus for 6 months to a year. Patrolling a desert for months on end would be torture. "I hope the Alliance attacks us," he heard one orc groan. "We all know it's going to happen sooner or later." It was a struggle to keep his expression under control. This was the beginning of the Horde's new era on Azeroth. With this victory, they would ensure their survival for 100 generations. And if they couldn't hold on to the world longer than that, well, by the spirits, there was nothing else Saurfang could do. Most of Orgrimmar had come out to watch the army depart. Curiosity ran high. The Horde did not fully understand what was so important about Silithus. Hopefully, the Alliance felt the same confusion. A familiar face pushed through the milling soldiers towards Saurfang. The orc smiled broadly.
"Old friend, it is good to see you,"
Saurfang said. Blaine Bloodhoof, High Chieftain of the Tauren, clasped his arm firmly.
"Off to war without me again?"
he asked, mockingly grave.
"If you want to sit in the desert for a few months, you are welcome to join me,"
Saurfang said lightly.
"Is that where you're going?"
Blaine's tone did not waver, but his eyes were eyes. Saurfang did not let himself show surprise. Bane knows the real plan, the orc realized. He didn't know how, but the tone of the Tauren's voice made it clear that he knew something. I need to stop underestimating him. This was Cairn's son, after all, and no fool.
"It will be over sooner than most think,"
he said evenly.
"Most of the Horde doesn't understand the goal of this mission, or why it must be done,"
Bane said. Neither do I, he meant.
"I believe they will very soon,"
Saurfang said.
"There's an opportunity now, and there's danger on the horizon. It's best to deal with it quickly. And cleanly, I hope,"
Bane said.
"Tell me, is this your plan or the war chief's?" "Mine,"
Saurfang said simply. The Tauren seemed revealed to hear that.
"Then I wish you well. Fight with honor, friend. Loktar, Loktar,"
Saurfang replied. It was time to depart. Saurfang ordered the massive army caravan with all of its carts and siege weapons and soldiers on foot to begin its march. Bane stepped back, never taking his eyes off Saurfang, even as the caravan stretched out into the distance. Nathanos rode on a cart just behind Saurfang. The war chief had done very well in giving the reins of this plan to the orc, Nathanos had to admit. Saurfang had learned warfare before he learned to walk, and it showed. His reputation and legacy were well earned. He had sacrificed much for his people, and the Horde trusted him to make the right decisions, even in dark days. Although Sylvanas has earned that reputation 1,000 times over, yet she is still mistrusted. Too many in the Horde were short-sighted and weak-willed. Sylvanas had seen what lay beyond this life. She knew what waited on the other side. What else could she do but act on that knowledge? If her actions sometimes seemed cruel, well, life was cruel. Existence was fleeting. Her plans soared over the horizons of mortality, and that frightened many. It did not frighten Nathanos. It delighted him. Saurfang twisted in his seat, looking at Nathanos. The Forsaken lifted his chin. Now? Saurfang nodded back. Now. It was noon. The Horde was halfway to the junction that led to the Barrens. Unbeknownst to almost everyone in this caravan, the first strike against the Night Elves had begun. If everything was going to plan, Night Elves were already dying. Soon, panic would set in. Then the counterattacks. Then the despair. For Sylvanas Windrunner could not be stopped, and the Kaldari would know it in their souls. Nathanos did not dream much, but he could see the victory in his mind. Soon he would stand beneath the branches of Teldrassil, walk the paths of Darnassus, and take Kaldari lives upon their own soil. All he had to do was wait. It would come to pass simply because Sylvanas had willed it. He had no doubts. Not about her, not about this plan. Lorash felt sorry for this group of Kaldrai. Their leader marched them up and down the forest as if they were fresh recruits who needed to be whipped into shape the hard way. If his eyes weren't deceiving him, these were all experienced veterans, not trainees. Overtraining was an actual danger. Grinding elite troops into complacency was one of the biggest mistakes a leader could make. Their exhaustion was his advantage, but he still felt a pang of sympathy. He had had awful leaders too. Unfortunately, though this officer was wearing out her troops, she demanded that they stay in perfect formation at all times. That annoyed him. No stragglers to pick off. He liked attacking from above, but he wouldn't take the chance in broad daylight, not while these night elves were in the open, alert and working together. That would be a great way to get a few kills and then die. It was half an hour past the time he and Riven were supposed to have launched their attack. Time was running out. They were a short distance away from Silverwind Refuge, a Kaldrai outpost. Other rogues had been assigned to attack that place. Even if there were no survivors, patrolling night elves would find the dead before long. Once they understood how many Kaldrai outposts had been attacked, they would be even more difficult prey. A leaf rustled behind Lorash.
"Back so soon?"
he whispered. The Forsaken rogue silently crawled next to him in the brush. The crushed leaf had been a courtesy. Rogues knew better than to sneak up on their peers without friendly noise.
"I see at least a dozen, maybe more,"
said Riven. His fingers poked absently at his exposed collarbone, a tick that never failed to unnerve Lorash.
"We are already late," Lorash muttered. "If we do not strike soon, we should retreat."
12 versus 2, and they would have to push into the Sentinels. Very dangerous enemies. The only thing that kept Lorash from calling a retreat immediately was the prize in front of him. "I think one of them is the Night Elf commander," he said.
"The commander of Ashenvale?"
Riven's tone noticeably brightened.
"Which one?"
Lorash raised his arm slowly so the motion would not attract any attention. His finger extended. "The tall female, scars across her entire face. Matches the description." They were 100 paces away, but that facial feature was obvious enough. Riven said nothing. They waited a few minutes longer. The night elves were still marching back and forth, and then, because one of them did not perfectly stay in sync with the others, the commander forced them to begin a grueling series of physical exercises. Lorash sighed. "They are not stopping." "Make the call, Riven. I will follow your lead."
"Normally, I would suggest we retreat and live to collect another payday,"
the Forsaken whispered calmly.
"But I've never killed a commander before, and she's exhausting the people who might protect her. Let's get closer."
Laura shrugged and crawled forward. Neither made a sound. There would be no more talking, not this close. There would only be hand signals. A galloping beast drew his attention. Someone was approaching. The two rogues watched as a night elf sentinel, riding a night saber, crashed through the brush, rushing to meet the larger group. "Commander! Commander!" she shouted. "We have come under attack!" All of the night elves turned to look at her. A small lapse, but a useful one. The elves were not paying attention to the rest of the world any longer as they gathered around their new arrivals. Riven laid a finger on Laura's arm. "Stay here," he gestured. Then he crawled quietly through the brush to a tree and began to climb it. Lorash could not stop him, not without alerting the enemies. "I suppose this is our opportunity," he thought. Striking from above still seemed reckless. Riven wanted the glory, though, and the payday. Lorash only caught pieces of the night elf's conversation. The scout reported that multiple attacks had taken out outposts all across Ashenvale. That caused quite a stir. The commander began barking orders so loudly that any noise Riven might have made was drowned out. He raised his eyes and watched Riven crawl along a branch, preparing to drop down. This was going to be a dramatic entrance. The Blood Elf silently patted his sleeves, feeling the shurikens hidden within, and then drew his daggers. Every blade he carried was coated in poison, different ones for different purposes. A scratch was all he needed. Ryfan stepped off the branch and plummeted downward. Lorish gritted his teeth. The commander was beginning to issue orders. Waiting a couple of minutes would have seen the group disperse. Too bloody impatient. The Night Saber, a night elf druid, of course, lifted his nose, sniffed, and then roared an alarm. Too late. Ryfan held his daggers close to his body. Aimed downward, he landed on the commander's back, stabbing wildly as he tumbled into the forest brush, startling every one of the night elves. Before they could react, Ryfan had rolled to his feet and swept a dagger across another elf's neck. Blood sprayed outward. Time to make an impression. Maybe Lorash could distract the group enough to give Ryfan a chance to run. Lorash covered the distance in 3 leaping steps and slashed, killing one, and then he went to work on the rest. Ryfan was a blur in their midst, and Lorash was a wraith whirling around their perimeter. 6 elves had fallen before they began to fight back effectively, and that meant it was time to leave. We are not under orders to engage in a fair fight, Lorash thought with a smile. The commander had been killed. Mission complete. Lorash stepped back. A touch of shadow made it look as if he simply disappeared, but the night elves did not panic. They fired arrows and magic into the gaps between the trees, hoping to catch him running. Lorash simply stood still, his back against a tree trunk, until nobody was looking his way. A raspy scream of pain put an end to his groaning feeling of satisfaction. Ryfan hadn't made good on his escape. Lorash risked a single, momentary glance and saw the forsaken rogue falling under the weight of a pouncing night saber. Ryfan's arm was gone, lying several paces away. Lorash clenched his jaw. With a wound like that, Ryfan was done. Damn. Rescue was impossible, not with this many Kaldril left alive. Lorash could leave, or he could die. Easy choice. He crawled 100 paces away before he risked standing up to run. One of us lived, the other died, and we killed 6. He wondered if Saurfang would consider that a success. Nathanos watched Saurfang carefully as the caravan approached the junction. This was the last moment to pull back. It would be foolish, but Saurfang could order the entire horde to turn around and go home. Once they made the turn north, toward Ashenvale, the horde would be committed. Saurfang had not told the lead caravan drivers his decision yet. Nathanos smoothly hopped from his cart and jogged to Saurfang's, keeping pace with it on foot. "Your orders, High Overlord," Nathanos said blandly.
"We have time yet,"
Saurfang said. Perhaps he is losing his nerve. Nathanos allowed an edge to creep into his voice. "What are you waiting for?" Saurfang's eyes swung over to Nathanos, and his hard stare made the Forsaken realize that Saurfang wasn't afraid at all. He was simply preparing himself for what was to come.
"Tell them yourself if you wish. We're going north."
Nathanos felt a brief flash of shame. He jogged to the front of the convoy to have a conversation with the drivers on the lead carts and the officers near them. "Saurfang has new orders for you. When we get to the junction in the Northern Barrens, bear right."
"What?"
a torrent asked.
"We're going right? To Ashenvale?"
"That is what Saurfang commands." "Obey," Nathanos said. A half hour later, there was some hesitation at the junction. Everyone had been prepared to turn left towards the crossroads and on to Silithus, but in the end, they did indeed obey. A stir went through the entire Horde army as they realized the change. Conversations sprung up and died, for there were only questions, not answers. Saurfang just looked straight ahead, apparently contented with his choice. Morka said nothing, but she could not stop herself from exchanging glances with the other guards. They looked just as shocked as she did, but as the horde marched toward Ashenvale, she put the pieces together. All of the odd tasks Saurfang had given her, all of the clandestine acts, she had not known what to make of any of them. But he had also promised that she would fight the Alliance soon. She walked alongside Saurfang's cart.
and when she glanced at him, it was clear that he had planned this. She was not witnessing a deviation from the plan, she was witnessing his grand strategy. She just couldn't see it yet. Within an hour, the convoy came within sight of the old Horde fortifications at the edge of the territory. A few years ago, Mortian Rampart had been the bulwark against the Night Elves pushing into the Barrens, but it had been abandoned when Garrosh Hellscreamed had been disposed. There should have been Night Elves on those fortifications. There weren't. Instead, there were two Horde rogues, an Orc and a Goblin, sitting comfortably on the structure, legs dangling in the air. They waved at the convoy as it approached, prompting another flurry of chatter among the army. As Sourfang's cart rolled underneath the rampart, he stood and climbed to the top so he could stand above the Horde convoy.
"Soldiers of the Horde, hear me," he bellowed.
The caravan rolled to a stop. All conversation and chatter disappeared. Nobody wanted to miss a word. Morka scarcely breathed.
"We're not going to Silithus. We were never going to Silithus,"
Sourfang said in a clear voice. By now, none of the Horde seemed surprised to hear it.
"We are embarking on a mission with a simple objective. We will conquer Darnassus, the home of the Kaldoroi."
Sourfang gave them a moment before continuing.
"The Alliance did not know we're coming. They have not prepared for our coming. Our first strike has already happened. The Night Elf scouts in Ashenvale are in disarray, but that does not mean this will be easy. They will fight hard. They will fight desperately. But they cannot stand against the Horde."
That broke the dam of shock. The entire caravan roared back at him, lifting their weapons and shaking their fists. Sourfang let the sound build, and then he motioned for silence. He got it in an instant.
"I cannot give you 6 months of peace in the desert,"
he said with a smile. Then he raised his voice in a shout that shook leaves of the nearby trees.
"All I can give you is a few days of glory. Loktar Ogar, for the Horde!"
Morka and thousands of her brothers and sisters of the Horde joined in. The reply did not shake the trees, it shook the hills. It would shake the world.
"For the Horde!"